Peoples of the worldwide federated internet, what's good? There are so many topics that as Christians we try to avoid. I don't know if it's done on purpose or if it's because they're topics that we're just uncomfortable discussing. And today I would like to talk about sex. Now, there's many different directions you can go in when talking about that topic, many different facets to it. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot over the past probably 4 weeks or so. Now, Cardi B released her song. I'm not going to mention the name of the song. I'm not going to tell you to look up the song. I haven't listened to it. I haven't watched the video. I heard enough about it to know it's not something I want to see. Anyway, there's a problem that we have as believers. We're reactionary. Now, there's nothing wrong with reacting, but I think we in some ways have forced the reactionary environment we find ourselves in. And I say that because many times, and I've said this before, we remove ourselves from certain conversations. Now, what happens when you do that, if you remove yourself from a conversation, you can't then get mad when that conversation goes in a certain direction. You removed your input. You're no longer involved. You're no longer part of the discussion. So when the pendulum swings only in one way, can you really be mad? It swung in that way because there was no opposing view. So when it comes to the matter of sex, like I said, it's an uncomfortable topic. What I've done with my children when it comes to uncomfortable topics, I address them head on. And the reason I take that approach is this is a world where information moves quick. So you have two options. Your first option is avoid the topic, say nothing about it. Here's what comes with that option. When someone else introduces that topic to your children, now you have to react to what they've been told. Children are impressionable, right? So oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes children will go off of the first thing they've heard, right? Law of first mentions. So if it's mentioned to them first by somebody outside the home in an improper context, now you have to react to what was said to them. You have to counter these ideas. When if you address these issues first, you talk to them about these things first, then when they hear something from someone else, those are going to be the people, those are going to be the ideas that are going to have to react to what they already know. And so in the world, I think we have a lot of the same thing going on. There's all of these ideas surrounding sex and surrounding the context of sex. And because we've left these things to the world, now we're only reacting to what's going on. So anyway, no, that's a long intro, but I want to deal with this out of the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Let's get to it. Now I'm going to stop at verse 10. And the reason is, and I would like to do a video on this as well, but when you get from verse 10 and on, it starts delving into the matter of divorce. And I do want to deal with that in a video, but that's going to be a longer video. There's a lot I like to discuss, and that would make this video too long, and it'd be too many directions I can go in, and my brain is jumbled sometimes. So I like to focus on one thing at a time. So verse 1, 1 Corinthians chapter 7. Now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. Now, this really covers a general principle that really shouldn't be. Anyone who is not a virgin, and even a virgin can understand this, right? People act like virgins don't have sexual desires, and we've all been virgins at one point. So clearly that's not the case. Something caused us to want to have sex. For those of us who had sex outside of marriage, part of it was curiosity. Part of it, people like me were introduced to porn way too early, so that piqued my curiosity way too early. I wish I would have held my virginity into my marriage. I wish I would have. And there's all kind of directions I can go in with that, and I'm kind of going to cover some of that. But anyway, in verse 1, now concerning the things whereof I wrote unto you, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Now it's obvious where he's going with this here, because in the next verse he says, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, let every woman have her own husband. Look, we got to keep it real. I'm not Superman. Maybe there's some guys out there that are Superman. I'm an unmarried man. I would hope, my prayer to God is, whatever woman I meet next, I marry. That's my purpose. I don't want to just date just for the sake of dating. With that being said, I know my limitations. I'm not a fool. I know if I'm dating somebody, if we're engaged and we're not married yet, I know good and well, once the kissing and the touching starts, it's a wrap. I'm not superhuman. Maybe there's some guys out there that can do that and not take that till it's full in. Hey, if that's you, respect. But I believe that's what this is going over here, right? To avoid where this would eventually lead. In verse 2, the Bible says, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. In verse 3, the Bible says, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise the wife unto the husband. Now, what is this talking about? That word benevolence means the disposition to do good, goodwill, kindness, charitableness, love, the love of mankind, accompanied with a desire to promote their own happiness. So pretty much what the Bible is saying here is, hey, please your wife. Wives, please your husband. This is proper and right before God. This is sex within its proper context. And in verse 4, so here's where fellas, I'm going to tell you, we get this confused, and we get this confused a lot. I know when I was a younger man, I got this idea, this concept, and this principle really confused and twisted, and I only saw it from one side. So in verse 4, the Bible says, the wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband. And most of us men, we end the verse right there. Nah, bro, that's not where it ends. And likewise also the husband hath not power over his body, but the wife. Now here's what I take away from this, right? Clearly, you should not keep yourself from your wife, and wives, you shouldn't keep yourself from your husband. I'm gonna get back to that, a thought I have on that in a minute. But in verse 5, it says, defraud ye not one another, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. That word defraud means to deprive of right, either by obtaining something by deception or artifice, or by taking something wrongfully without the knowledge or consent of the owner. With that in mind, read verse 4 again. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband, and likewise also the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. Now, here's the problem people run into with biblical principles like this. We stick to the letter of the law without the heart behind it, right? So for a wife, if you love God and you want to walk with God, you understand that you don't belong to yourself as a wife. And a husband, if you want to walk with God and you want to be right with God, you understand that you don't belong to yourself as a husband. The wife hath not power of her own body, but the husband. And likewise, so this doesn't just apply to women, and this is the misconception that a lot of men have. And likewise also, the husband hath not power of his own body, but the wife. Now, what I wanted to get into, kind of as a side note, but dealing with this, what your wife wants from you, men, and women, what your husband wants from you should be something that you oblige if it's within your power. And I will tell you what I mean. I work out. My diet isn't perfect, but I do make an attempt to eat properly, proper nutrient. I try not to gorge myself on junk food. I try to maintain my body. And here's the reason I do this. One, for my own health's sake. The second reason I do this is because at some point, it is my prayer that God would provide me a wife. And understanding that very few women find an out of shape man attractive. So if I desire to find a wife, then I believe it is only right that I keep myself up, because in the event that God does allow me to get married, then I have to understand that I am not my own physically, right? So the desires of my wife would have to be met. She wants me to be physically fit, then it's up to me to keep my body physically fit. If my wife wants sex, then it's up to me to provide that. I don't have the right to say, no, I don't want to. Now, here's the thing. This is the case. But what I keep in my mind is I want to love the Lord my God with all my heart, with all my soul, and with all my mind. And I want to love my neighbor as myself. I don't want to just do this out of a sense of duty. I want to do this because I understand how God set this out, how it's supposed to be, and this is the right thing to do. And I want to love my wife. I want to do this with the right heart. But I think a lot of men go into marriages holding this view that, oh, my wife has to keep herself up and she has to give me sex when I want it. Like, hey, bruh, that same thing applies to you. It doesn't just apply to her. Don't get this twisted. And I think a lot of men get that twisted. And the Bible says the only reason you can withhold sex from your partner, and it has to be with consent, is for fasting and prayer. And that word defraud, if you look at the tail end of the definition, it says, or by taking something wrongfully without the knowledge or consent of the owner. If you're married, husbands, you don't own your body. That belongs to your wife. Wife, if you're married, you don't own your body. That belongs to your husband. Now, the reason I dealt with the letter of the law, that whole concept, because most people in both directions like to take a concept like this and beat their mate over the head. You can't do this, and you're supposed to do that. Not the right way, homie. Not the right way to do it. What I understand now, I wish I understood when I was a younger man. As a married man or a married woman, the best way to address situations like this, if you feel your mate is doing something improperly, go before God and pray. If you can sit down and talk with them about it, talk with them about it. Open the Bible. You guys have a biblical conversation about what's going on. If you're not in a space where you can have that conversation, pray about it and trust God to do what he does. In verse 6, the Bible says, "But I speak this by permission and not by commandment." So the Apostle Paul, who penned this letter, is letting you know what I'm about to say to you is not a commandment, and this didn't necessarily, or this didn't come from God, but this is my own opinion. This is what I would do if I were you. So I'm going to read verse 6 down to verse 9. For I would that all men were even as myself, but every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner and another after that manner. I say therefore to the unmarried widows, it is good for them that they abide even as I. Paul was a single man, unmarried. So he's giving his advice and his opinion. It is my opinion. If you can, then you do like I do. You carry your life out, you do your thing without a mate. But that's his opinion. And he understands that not everyone has the power to do that. In verse 7, he says, "For I would that all men were as I myself, but every man hath his proper gift of God, one after this manner and one after that manner, or another after that." So he understood not everybody would have the power to do and live their life how he lived his life out. And then in verse 9, he said, "But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than burn." Sex has its proper context. We've allowed the world to hijack the conversation surrounding sex. Sex is meant for a man and his wife, for a wife and her husband. That is the proper context of sex. In the book of Hebrews, let's go there. The book of Hebrews, chapter 13 and verse 4. Hebrews 13:4, the Bible says, "Marriage is honorable in all, and the bed undefiled, but whoremongers and adulterers God will judge." Those are people who have sex out of the context of marriage. This is the problem I've noticed with a lot of Christians. I'm going to compare how they view sex with fire. Bear with me here. Fire has its proper context. Nobody's afraid to talk about fire. There's campfires. There's controlled burns. There's if you're grilling, there's fires for that. You can use a fire for birthday candles. There's several reasons fire can be used. But nobody would argue that I shouldn't go outside with a lighter and set the brushes around my apartment complex on fire. That would set the whole place on fire. Does that mean that fire itself is bad? No, there's nothing inherently just bad about fire itself, but it has its proper context. Sex is the same way. There's nothing wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with desiring sex. And sex is good. It is enjoyable. For some reason, many people, many Christians, many Bible believers have the hardest time acknowledging that. Like, yo, it is good. It is desirable, but it has its proper context. And that proper context is marriage. The reason conversation surrounding sex has been hijacked, the reason there is so much confusion as far as what to do about this thing we call sex, in my opinion, is because there's many Christians who remove themselves from this conversation in the public sphere, and there's many Christians who have removed themselves from this conversation with their children. Children have to understand this idea of sex, because if you don't talk to your children about this, somebody will, either the TV or YouTube or somebody at school or some song they've heard. Somebody's going to talk to them about this thing. They must understand There's nothing wrong with desiring sex. There's nothing wrong with sex itself, but sex has its context. And the Bible lays out that context. That context is marriage. If you cannot contain, the best thing for you to do is pray that God brings you a man that you're compatible with, that you can marry. And men, if you absolutely cannot contain, it is the best thing for you to do to pray to God for him to bring a woman that you're compatible with, that you can enjoy this thing in its proper context, exactly how God intended it. This shouldn't be something that we as Christians are afraid to talk about and discuss. And again, I think one of the reasons why people are afraid is because people, Bible believers, are afraid to say, yeah, this is enjoyable, but it has its proper context. And because, like I said, because we've removed ourselves from that conversation, there's all kind of things going on that God never intended. Now, that doesn't mean that just because we're in the conversation, none of these things are going to happen. Sin is going to happen. Men are wicked. It is what it is. But I think we can at least, at minimum, have a greater effect on how our children view this thing if we have conversations with them about these topics. This is a real big topic. I'm sure there's something I missed. People have their views, and I'm sure somebody somewhere is going to have some disagreement with something I've said in this video. And if so, hey, I have no issue chopping it up and discussing whatever issue is taken with anything I've said. Y'all know what it is. Stay frosty, people.